Species. Unite.
When we arrived, we had no records. We had nothing. We had no documentation. And one of the first things that you have to actually prove to all of these international, government parties and so on, you need to say, okay, but where did you get this elephant? And we had no idea. We were actually government officials, and we had this elephant, and we had no real idea of where this elephant came from.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Novogratz. This is Species Unite. In 2012, during a heat wave in Buenos Aires, a polar bear died in the city zoo. His death set off protests by city residents, not only for the polar bear, but for the terrible conditions for all of these animals in the zoo. And the city listened. They stepped in. They took over the zoo. Thomas Sciolla, who had become the new wildlife and conservation manager, and his team decided that they could do a whole lot more for these animals than just improve their conditions. And so for more than a decade, they have been translocating hundreds of animals to sanctuaries, giving them the lives they deserve and the closest thing to freedom that is possible for animals that have been in squalid captivity for their entire lives. In fact, this very week, they are moving Poopy, their last elephant, across South America to a sanctuary in Brazil. This is one of the best stories I've heard in a long time. It's a story of hope for animals and a story about how to make real change happen. Hi, Tom.
Hi, Beth. Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. What I think we should start with is you and just how this all became your life, and then we'll go into the bigger picture of your work.
Ever since I was a kid, I've been amazed by the natural world. Everything, started rolling, life, responsibilities. I actually studied business management initially. And that's when I realized, no, this is not what I want to do. I finished my degree in business management, but then I went back to school again, to college for biology, biodiversity, conservation, and environment.
How did you go from biodiversity and conservation to saying, you know what, we don't want to have these wild animals and exotic animals in general, in zoos anymore? Where did that all happen?
I was basically working at the Senate. We all started listening to these stories of riots outside of Buenos Aires Zoo. The government started to talk about the possibility of actually, having this very progressive project where they would transform the zoo into not a zoo anymore. They didn't even exactly know what that meant at that point. I don't think none of us did. But the idea of actually reshaping a very old institution, zoos, they've been around for hundreds of years, since the history of humanity, basically, and reshaping something culturally relevant, like an institution as such, was very, very interesting for me. And I was like, I'm in. I don't even know how I'm going to be a part of that. But yeah, I started just knocking doors and became a part of the whole project. I've always knew that was not really the right way to move forward in terms of inspiring new generations to love nature and actually conserving species.
Go back for a second and talk about what the Buenos Aires Zoo, the zoo you're talking about, looked like and what the facilities were like for these animals and why the riots were happening.
Buenos Aires Zoo it's actually the oldest zoo in Latin America. So it has an ancient history since the 1800s. It's a very old institution, similar to what happened to most of the zoos in Europe. Space is extremely limited due to this even older conception to how animals and their welfare should, come across in their day-to-day life inside of the zoo. The conditions were really, really bad. The grounds were city owned, but the city was actually leasing, the exploitation of that business to a private company. So of course, the private company only cared about tickets and having lots of animals, and people being able to see tons of animals was the only thing that the private owner actually cared for. The conditions were really, really dire, very bad. Polar bears in the middle of Buenos Aires, as you can imagine. Buenos Aires, it's extremely cold in winter, but it's extremely hot and humid in summer. So literally the worst place in the world for a polar bear to be. Sadly, in December, one year, a couple of years before everything started, Winner, the name of that polar bear, died of a heat stroke and during lots of fireworks in Christmas. It was a combination of stress, heat, and so on, bad conditions. And basically he passed. And that really was the spark that started everything. That, in the combination also with Sandra, which was this orangutan that was actually the first animal, at least that I have a knowledge of, that was granted personhood, legal personhood. It was a combination that actually made it possible for the government to be like, okay, there is a lot of social pressure. We are going to do this. We are going to actually move forward with this transformation because we know that the people are supporting us. So, of course, riots were a very important part. A group of activists would go to the entry of the zoo every Sunday, and they would, go with letters and so on, and started, convincing people that perhaps it was a nice experience, a nice getaway for their children, but was actually not really good for the animals. So everything came together, and the government, and I have to say that because sometimes I'm a little bit skeptical of governments, but it is true. The government actually was very progressive back then, and they were like, okay, we understand that this is not okay. We are listening to the people, and we can do something to change that. And it sounds super simple, but it is so hard to actually have that step-by-step situation. So kudos to the government back then. They actually were the ones that gave, room and space for us to actually transform things.
And this was what, like 10 years ago?
It all socially started probably 10 years ago, you're right. But the moment where, as a government, we decided to actually literally break in and change all the logs and take over the zoo, that was mid 2016. So not even 10 years since we started with that whole process. And we're not yet fully done. I mean, the Eco Park is a fully transformed zoo, but it's not really, it's always going to be a work in progress. Even now, we are working with the translocation of the last African elephant that habitates the Eco Park. So we're still working there. Yeah.
Let's go back. I kind of want to see this whole process for two reasons. One, because I'm completely just curious and fascinated by it, but also because I just think this is so inspirational for cities and zoos all over the world. So what's the process? So they went in and locked everyone out. Is that how it started?
This particular situation was complex because we were taking over the zoo from a previous owner. And of course, the owner was not really happy with that idea. We were not renovating their lease. But the thing is that when you work with animals, it's very hard to be like, okay, you hand me the keys and we'll see what happens. It's not an apartment that you stop the agreement with your landowner. It's animals that they're literally being taken care of 24/7. And their safety in particular is really, really important. So there were a lot of safety concerns. That's why we actually had to go in. It was, a night, and we had to change all the locks because at a zoo, that's very symbolic, I guess. But in a zoo, when you control the locks, you control everything, and that was the first thing that we had to take care of. That was the beginning, as I mentioned. Initially, it was a very long process where we had to actually assess the situation. It was not a comfortable takeover. It was not like, okay, here you have all of the records for my animals, and these are my keepers. We had no idea of anything because, of course, it was a very big conflict for the owners of the zoo. they didn't want to go. So they actually withheld so much information and knowledge. So we had to start from scratch, and assessing the situation was the biggest part. We had to make sure that we knew how many animals we really had there, which ones were in the worst conditions, and how we could improve those conditions in a very brief period of time to make sure that they were given at least some basic dignity before we could even start dreaming of this idea of what an eco park is. We had to take care of all of these animals that were in a very bad condition. So that was, I would say, the initial stage, actually assessing the situation, having a proper registry of how many animals are there and their welfare conditions, making a team. Of course, we made a team, a very small team before taking over, and then we actually brought in most of the people that were working at the zoo because they had a lot of knowledge. Having that team, it was a very, very important part initially. Then, once everything is kind of like assessed and the animals are not, just literally dying in front of you because of the horrible conditions that you found them in, you start looking forward to actually translocating those animals. So that was one of our initial objectives that we had to push because they were in such terrible conditions that we couldn't even think of, just having them in crates and translocate them half across the world because they wouldn't survive. So anyways, once we were at that, okay-ish situation, we started designing this whole process in order to evaluate how we would be able to improve animal welfare for these particular individuals. And of course, that's way more than just having more space. It is a very complex, matrix where you analyze, okay, how many keepers is the animal going to have? Is the animal going to be able to be within a climate that is proper to their natural distribution? It is an institution that specialized in that species. It is an institution that, of course, has lots and lots of space for that animal to roam. It is an institution that has not just big spaces, but actually complex spaces that actually represent something that would be similar for this animal in the wild. It is a very lengthy process. We, of course, came across with a surprise, I guess, that most of the captive animals were not really suitable for being released, particularly those animals that are actually very intelligent. It is very, very hard as you move up in the intelligence, let's say, kingdom of animals. It is very hard to just, have them trust their instincts. They just don't work like that. Primates, cetaceans, elephants, they learn from their families. They learn from their mothers. They learn from experiences. And if you deprive them from those experiences, they're just not going to be able to be released and be a part of an ecosystem ever again. That's why that's also, a big, misconception of why zoos are keeping all of these animals in captivity, with the idea that someday they might use those populations to repopulate natural populations of animals. It's not really. For some species, yes, it works like that, particularly those species that people don't really think they're charismatic, like some frogs, some plants. Yeah, for that it works, and that's where zoos can make a lot of work. But for some, it is really, really hard, and it just doesn't work like that. So we came across that knowledge. We actually were able to move forward in the direction of finding the sanctuaries, and of course, that's a whole process in itself. The amount of paperwork that you need to actually have in order before you move forward with the translocation, especially international translocations. Argentina, sadly, we do not have many sanctuaries here. Our foundation actually has a horse sanctuary, but that's pretty much about it. You don't have the level and the standard that perhaps you would find in the US or Europe in terms of care, in terms of professionalism, and so on. So most of our translocations were really, really far away. They actually entailed coordinating between countries, coordinating between animal health authorities, CITES permits, customs, so many permits. And most of them, they have an expiration date. So you need to make sure that you basically align so many planets before it can happen. But the biggest planet is actually an animal, and it's an animal that you cannot really force to go inside of the crate. And it's an animal that you cannot force to collaborate with you in order to perform, the medical tests that you are required for the exportation, because we actually requested our animals to perform some training where they would collaborate with us in all of those processes. And that, of course, goes along, a timeline that is controlled by the animal and their preferences and their, how happy they are to train that day or not. If they're, some of them are more comfortable with the crate, some others are not, and that we cannot control.
How many animals are we talking about?
It is a rough estimate. We're talking about 1,600 animals that there were at the zoo back then. Right now, the zoo has only around 400 animals, and all of them are there because they are native species and there aren't better centers for them to go. We translocated most of them to the US, actually. We translocated so many different individuals, so many different names and stories. White lions, white tigers, brown bears, spectacled bears, elephants, orangutans, chimpanzees, so many different animals with, as I was saying, their particular stories and suffering. And all of those translocations went on perfectly safe. We had no casualties during the translocation, which is, of course, a very risky process. Most of them are now still enjoying, after years, life in the most similar conditions that they could be provided in terms of matching their freedom, basically. So yeah, so many animals.
Will you talk about like a few individual stories and what the whole process was like for them? Like take Sandra, the orangutan, for example.
Of course, Sandra was, I loved, so I say that about each one of them, but Sandra was very dear to me. She was so lonely. She was so lonely. And it is a misconception because most of the biologists and ecologists, they would recognize that orangutans in the wilderness, in the wild, they are sort of solitary apes in comparison to other apes, of course. But as it is seen in captivity, where they have a more deprived, especially females, a more deprived scenario to just carry on with their lives, you can see that they sometimes choose the contrary, to be in company of other animals. So Sandra was very keen of having time spent with humans, with keepers. She was a social animal, in particular, that individual. She actually came from Germany. She was a hybrid. So that's also a big problem in zoos, where actually we have different species that are having their separate populations in the wild, but in zoos, for some reason, and just because we want, an orangutan, there is a very bad, genetic management, and you come up with these hybrids that sadly they're just there for the sake of being exhibited, because they don't even belong to any real wild population. She was not a Sumatran orangutan. She was not a Borneo orangutan. She was something in the middle. As I said, she came from Germany when she was really young, and her name was Marisa originally. And she spent most of her life alone. We're talking about decades of captivity. She was around 31 years old by the time that we were able to actually translocate her. So you can imagine how long and tedious her life was. And of course, we're talking about decades of having, that institution being led by people that only cared about profit. So, of course, everything that comes with conservation, welfare, those are expenses generally, and it's not something that is high priority for some of these places, in particular this one. Her life was as good as we could provide, but thanks to the public opinion, there was a legal process that started, where we started working with a judge that actually granted her, as I said, with legal personhood. So that meant for her in particular was that she was like a person that was deprived of her freedom. So she would have regular visits of the courthouse. We would have to make all of these reports saying how was she doing and all of the things that we were doing in terms of improving as much as possible their welfare. and how we were preparing for the translocation itself. It was a very, very lengthy process. I'm just summing up, years and years. It actually took literally 4 years since we started in 2016 to actually 2020, or it was the end actually of 2019 when we were able to translocate her to this incredible sanctuary in the US, which is Center for Great Apes. It is probably one of the greatest places in the world for apes that were rescued from the entertainment industry. So even Bubbles from Michael Jackson is there. They are really, really good in actually, bringing back those animals from very odd behaviors, human behaviors, and so on. It was our main objective to get her to that center because we thought, okay, that's the best place. But the US, they have, and of course I'm not complaining, I'm just saying how it is. They have this huge standard. They don't have a lot of standards. If you are trying to, import an alligator, a bear, a lion, it's fine. Just, a vet saying, okay, the animal, it's okay, and you're good. You can just go through customs and it's no problem. Oh boy, if it's an ape, oh no, they have to go through so many tests because, of course, of how genetically related to humans they are. They pose an increased risk for human-animal transmission, zoonotic diseases. And you have to actually take the ape to a CDC quarantine facility, which is literally, ET quarantine situation. Imagine, the white, tracksuits and masks and everything. So it is a very stressful situation, a very small place. So we actually had to, do a lot of extra training with Sandra because we knew that it was going to be very stressful for her. Us being able to prepare her in order to be ready for those situations was the best thing we could do. So we started doing all of the training using, the white jumpsuits, that the CDC would use, the masks and everything. So she would start, getting a feel of what would happen. We did that. The CDC facility was okay. We gave her a lot of support. Everything was fine. Non-disease were found. Of course, we made a lot of tests in advance. We knew that she was going to pass all of those tests because we wanted to make sure. But it was a big relief when she actually passed all of those checks. After a month, she actually traveled to Center for Great Apes. And she's been there for now, lots of years. She decided to spend most of her life with Jethro. I think it's the name of the male, Jethro or Jethro. It is a huge male, a sweetheart. And again, as you can see, orangutans in the wild behave differently from, a hybrid orangutan that spent most of her life in captivity. It is really, really nice to actually, remember these stories because it is a very complex process. And sometimes you are on the brink of quitting so many times. But every animal that you actually, you're like, oh, but look at Sandra, look at the beautiful life she has now. Like, okay, we have to do the same for this other one and that other one and that other one. And it's a chain that just keeps you going all the time. And it is really nice. But yeah, Sandra's story was very hard, similar to Mara, the elephant.
The New York Times did an incredible article back in 2020 when you guys moved Mara, and the photos and the story. For anyone who didn't read it, they should go back and find it because it makes you want every animal out of every zoo. It is so beautiful, but I know it was really complex for that, to say the least. So will you talk about that tell that story too?
That was a definition of complexity. Yeah, Mara. Oh, Mara, she was a monument. She is a monument in herself. It's been, again, years. It's going to be 5 years now that she's been living with other elephants in literally the most perfect place for elephants to be, at least in South America. But it was really hard to get there. When we arrived, we had no records. We had nothing. We had no documentation. And one of the first things that you have to actually prove to all of these international, government parties and so on, and permits, you need to say, okay, but where did you get this elephant? And we had no idea. We were actually government officials, and we had this elephant, and we had no real idea of where this elephant came from. It was really hard to explain, where this elephant came from. So it was most certainly, an investigation work initially, where we had to go from, today to where she started her life. And we started, just knocking doors everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. The first thing that we discovered was that she was actually confiscated initially. She used to work for a circus in Argentina. She was confiscated because the circus had, a terrible reputation of keeping animals in a very, very bad condition. So, of course, back then, we're talking about the 1991, circus, bad condition, zoo, better condition. So, of course, it was just natural. There were no sanctuaries back then, especially here in South America. So they were like, okay, we're just going to take this elephant to a zoo. And of course, her life improved a lot. She at least didn't have to, keep on working every morning for, her food. She was not beaten, and she was not attacked every day if she wouldn't perform. So we can say that it was a little bit better. It was a little bit better, for sure. Still, she couldn't share her day-to-day life with any other animal. At some point, they placed her together with Puppy and Cookie, two African elephants that were there back then. But African elephants and Asian elephants are just so different in so many ways. Not just, anatomically, they're just so different in how they process emotions and how they relate to each other. So it was basically, a Chinese person trying to speak with someone from Argentina and just not understanding each other. And of course, a lot of conflicts would arise. And it was really bad. So they had to be separated. So she spent most of her life alone. And we're talking about decades. She arrived in the 91 when we started working, to get her out of there. It was already, 2020. So lots and lots of years. After so many investigations, we came across this information that there was this other smaller circus, a family-owned circus, because this one where she was taken from, it was a very, big, very commercially sound, circus, one of the biggest ones in Argentina. But we started, just digging, and we found out that, oh no, so there is this smaller family circus. Let's try to find them out. Of course, it was very hard. We had to start tracking, family by the last name, and we actually were able to reach out to this very old lady that used to be the daughter of the owner of this, family-owned circus. She actually was raised next to Mara, and she started telling us all of that story. It was so moving because we actually understood them so much. It was a very different situation. Of course, Mara would be performing at that circus, but she was a part of that family. I'm not saying it's fine to keep elephants in circuses at all. I'm just trying to have some level of contrast. She was just one more elephant in this other circus, and she had to perform, and she was beaten otherwise, and she was attacked all the time. But in that other circus, she was there. She was not chained. She would be. She was just a part of that family. Of course, it was a family that was not something that she could really understand, but you could tell that they actually loved her so much. We were able to, of course, they were able to give us so much information and documents, which was what we needed. So we were able to pick up from them where she was actually originally bought. So she was bought in the 70s around. She was just a puppy. She was so young. She was so furry. Elephants when they're babies, they're way more hairy than when they are adults. She's so cute. I'm going to send you the picture later. And she was bought in Germany for a really long time, particularly due to their colony past and so on. They were a huge gateway from Asia and lots of parts from Africa. Also, the biggest gateway for actually purchasing animals for zoos. They would go into the wilderness, they would capture these animals, especially when they were babies, and then they would sell them to the Western world. Argentina, Canada, the United States, the rest of Europe. So It was really really interesting to delve in that information. So we were able to find this particular zoo. Would you imagine that they were still be up and running? And we were able to, of course, I'm going to preserve their identity, but we were able to convince them to actually come across with a document. Like it was like a new document acknowledging that from all of these investigations that we did, they would acknowledge that it was highly probable that Mara was actually in the 70s, bought from them. Oh, that document changed everything. Lots of doors were open after that. We were able to start moving forward with so many things that were frozen, in time for years and years. We started getting all of the permits again, and everything was, just rose, and we were so close. And then COVID started. I was like, oh no, man, like what else can happen? Like I've been literally planning for this and trying to make this happen for years. We're so close. I mean, her crate was already there. She was training, to get inside of the crate. She was doing wonderfully. She was so good. She was so comfortable inside of her crate. Pandemic. Oh God. I was like, everything was closed down. Argentina had one of the most strict COVID imposed quarantine. Like you were not allowed to go, not even, 1 block away. You had to stay inside of your house for so many months. And it was just then, that March, that we were actually going to be moving forward with the translocation. So a whole new world started. I started, picking up so many different phones and trying to explain this situation to government officials, customs officials, sanitary health officials, the same in Argentina, the same in Brazil, to convince them, to explain to them, like, I know that the world is going through some of the biggest crisis in the recent history, but like for this animal, it is her world. Like we need to be able to do something for her. And it was really tough at first. Nobody really cared, and I understand, because of course the world was going through so much back then. Lots of people died, and it was a very terrible moment. But with lots of persistence, we were able to be given so many special permissions. Like nobody could cross the border, but we were 4 people that were allowed to actually travel with our elephant across the border. So it was ludicrous at some point, and it was a warm, nice story for people, at least here in Argentina, and I know in so many other parts of the world too. It was so nice for them to actually be able to listen to a nice story in in the middle of so much death and so much doubts that the world had back then. So we were able to get all the permits, and we were granted the permissions, the special permissions to cross the border, and we took her. It was really hard because elephants, in comparison to other animals, are way more complex and in everything that it entails. So their translocations are, of course, more complex. And it was our first elephant translocation, and for that, we really, really wanted, the sanctuary specialized team to come and help us. But they were not allowed that. The only thing that was allowed is us, traveling, crossing the border with her. So, lots of preparations, lots of coordination. And once we crossed the border, it took us around 2 days, because we had to go by land. Planes were not an option at all. So we went by land. We reached the border, so many hours, so many permits, and so on. And then we actually were able to find, the team of the sanctuary. And then from the border, there were 2 more days that we had to keep, ongoing our little adventure. But at least by then, we were double the people, double the experience. Everything was a little bit better. She was, of course, more stressed, because as the days, start passing, of course, the animal becomes more and more stressed, regardless of how much training you did with the crate and so on. It's, of course, it's just logical. It's, it comes to a point that she's like, okay, you're, feeding me, washing me, cleaning after me, but, I still need to start walking, move around, and a little bit complex in that sense, but we were able to make it. It was literally an adventure. She was so good. It looked like she understood that even though it was a very complex and tedious process, she was being taken to a better, much better place. And when she arrived, tears everywhere. It was very emotional. She, of course, didn't want to go outside of her crate for a while. It took her a time to understand that she was in a safe space. Imagine she would be, listening from afar to other elephants. All of a sudden, she like her entire life, she was on her own. It was lots of emotions, lots of different sounds, smells, temperature. Imagine the temperature in the middle of Brazil where this sanctuary is. It's probably one of the closest thing that an Asian elephant is going to in terms of temperature and humidity and so on. It's probably one of the most similar scenarios to their natural distribution area. So everything was so different for her. It took her a while, but after being so patient with her, she on her own terms, she came out of the crate, and everything moved so fast. After that, the sanctuary, they are so professional.
This is Global Sanctuary for Elephants, where she went.
Yes, exactly. Scott and Kat, they were a huge part of this. Right? Just like me, they were helping me day to day to solve so many obstacles. Not even when we were there, but I'm talking years before. I've been working with these people for years because elephant translocations, they need years of preparations. Sadly, yeah, they're great. They have all of this experience with elephants, all of these standards, all of this way of actually understanding them in a way that I think few people in the world can. And they were like, "Oh, Tom, I think we're just going to give her a couple of days to settle." But she was so eager in meeting the other elephants that even for them it was a little bit too soon. But she was literally saying, "Dude, I wanna go and meet these elephants." And so, of course, they granted the permission a couple of days earlier from what they actually expected initially. And it was just joy. She was so happy. I don't know. There is a rumor that perhaps one of the elephants that is there at some point when she was really young, we lost track of a name of one of the elephants that actually came to South America with her. And there is this rumor that it might be her. And the reason we're saying that, or we're thinking that, is because you wouldn't believe the connection that they have in a split second. It was like, "It's been so long. I miss you so much. How are you?" All of these sounds, enjoyment, excitement, gentleness. We're talking about titans. These animals are massive. And the way that they're able to at the same time be so tender and kind. It was, I'm going to send you the video as well of that exact moment. It was the literal definition of joy. It was so moving. It was we were all, just crying so much. I still think about that, and I get a little bit emotional because it's been years, but it's those moments when you're like, okay, I said this was my last animal, but I have to move on to the other one. And that's, I think, how we got to where we are right now. Poopy in particular, the last African elephant, she used to share a captivity in the same place. We're talking about Buenos Aires Zoo, and we're so close. We are on the last preparations for her to actually travel, and it's still a lot of work, a lot of problems all the time. No matter how many times you did an animal translocation, each one is different. They have their own set of problems and circumstances that you cannot control, that you can never really be like, "Oh, I've done this so many times, 1,000 times. I don't care. It's going to be easy." It's never easy. It's so hard, but it's so worth it. And yeah, we're so close. We're so close. So I'm hoping that if everything goes according to plan by this month, by the end of this month, or probably beginning of March, she's going to be at the sanctuary as well. So yeah, really looking forward to that.
That's incredible. The story got me so emotional. So Poopy's still there. Are there still a lot of animals you want to move there? Are the remaining ones more native animals that need help and will stay in the new eco park?
So sadly, Poopy is probably going to be the last animal that we translocate. And I say sadly because We're really happy to be moving forward with this last translocation. But at the same time, there are other animals that in an ideal world, they wouldn't be there. And I'm talking particularly about two giraffes. We have two very, adult giraffes now. And logistics for giraffes are so complex. That's why they are traded or bought and sold when they are puppies, when they are super young, because of the height problem. They cannot really be sedated. Their logistics is very complex. And for us to actually take them away, it would be very negligent in terms of their care. So at this point, for them, for the two giraffes and the two hippos, we're just providing them as much welfare as we can, but there isn't really realistic options for them at this point. So I think that after Puppy, at least for a while, the translocation eternal process is going to be coming to an end. For now. And the animals that we still have there, that's a good question, because there are other animals. People from all over the world, they can just, whenever they're visiting Buenos Aires, they can go there. It is, no ticket nor no anything. It's just, a public park where people can see some of these animals, but in a very indirect way. They cannot really just sit across, a fence and look at the animal. There are, the animals that are being rehabilitated, they are basically hidden. So the people, they really struggle to see the animals. Most of them are like, oh, I came to this place to see animals, and I haven't seen any animals. And that's the whole point. You can see them through cameras. You can see them from really afar, or, from in the middle of some plants, but you're never going to be seeing an animal in the way that you would expect from a zoo. And these animals that are still there, which again are very few, are animals that are actively within a conservation program. So as the third stage after the second stage, that was translocating all of the exotic animals to sanctuary, the third stage starts happening, sometimes even at the same time, where you start having a lot of space and a lot of just capability, in terms of human resources, and very capable professionals that learned a lot of wildlife. So you are like, okay, what can I do with this? So let's apply that to actually protecting the native species that we have here. That's when the conservation part started for the zoo and for me, and I started designing the entire conservation strategy for the park. And the main idea was that we would only have very few conservation programs. And the only conservation programs that we would have were programs that had a team of scientists from a different organization, NGO, or even some state working with that conservation. So if they would be in the wild being like, oh, this Andean condor was just shot, okay, we would take the Andean condor. We would try to rehabilitate the Andean condor and then release them back. In some cases, sadly, after so many human wildlife conflicts, even after really good rehabilitation, we have the best surgeons, so good vets, but even then, sometimes that animal loses a wing, but still, it's an individual, and it's an individual of an endangered species. So we decided to, some of them, keep them, provide them the best possible conditions. Most of them start breeding after that, and their offspring, 100%, we translocate them, we release them back into the wild, back into those programs that are real and happening there. And of course, it is very hard to select which species you would be working with because of what I was telling you in terms of, their offspring being able to fend for themselves in the wilderness. So I would say all of our animals were able to release younglings back into the wild for them to start, fulfilling their ecosystemic role. And a few of them, there is one species that is a little bit more complex, and that's the green-winged macaw. Is the second largest macaw in the world. It was fully extinct here in Argentina. So we started working with this other NGO that they would have a very, big infrastructure in situ. So where we are releasing them. So there is a way softer release process where they have huge cages for them to actually start roaming inside of the rainforest for themselves, start to learn which fruit is good, which fruit is bad. Macaws are extremely intelligent as well, and they need to learn. They need to have that process. And so, but that process is being taken care of by that foundation. And that's, I would say, the only case where we're working with an animal that don't instinctively is able to be released. The rest are frogs that are on the brink of extinction, some plants, and a snail that is fully extinct in the wild. Yeah, that's a little bit of the conservation part, I would say.
It's incredible what you've done. Are other people paying attention to this in terms of your model and using it or talking to you about using it?
Honestly, I think that's on us because we have been so busy actually doing this that we were never really able to actually start sharing our story. And given that, of course, we are part of a Latin American country, it is harder to get the attention, I would say, from Europe or from the US. So thank you so much for being interested in what we're doing. But no, actually, we haven't been sharing that much. I think the end of last year was the first time I actually went to a congress representing the foundation and actually, sharing what we did. And so many people was really interested. And that's when we started talking about the possibility of actually, taking this model to other institutions. We don't want to close zoos. We don't want to shut down the zoos. We still think that they have a lot of potential in terms of actually connecting, cities to nature. We're just trying to show them a better way to do it, specifically for the animals that they're keeping, and for the purpose of efficiency as well. Something that perhaps I failed to mention earlier is that what we did was that we kept on adding interactive educational experiences where we actually had, cages in the past, and kids are so happy with this. I have tons of pictures and videos I can share with you of kids that are, enjoying themselves and learning about nature with animatronics, with projectors, and with interactive experiences. All of these kids, they can still connect to nature, be inspired by nature and animals, and at the same time, not really, just having an animal there just for the purpose of them to see it. I mean, kids from so many generations, most of our generations, recent generations, we've been in love, we've been mesmerized with dinosaurs, and we've never seen one. It's always been, an interactive experience for us to get to know dinosaurs. So the idea of saying that you need to exhibit an elephant for kids to like the elephant and protect the elephant, it's just nonsense, I think, at this point. So really focusing on giving, interactive experiences. And I'm saying we're not, Disney World. We're just the city government from Argentina. It's not like we had, like an infinity of resources. We just were try to be as clever as possible, make really nice interactive experiences with using good technology, but still cheap technology. But if you come and you see it, it is really, really nice. It is really nice, and kids love it. Kids learn a lot from their wildlife, which is also a big problem, especially for countries like us. We have this beautiful wildlife, but most of the kids, they just wanted to see a lion, wanted to see a giraffe, wanted to see an elephant, but they had no idea about tapirs, about jaguars, about macaws. So them being able to know what biodiversity habitates in the same country as them, it's also a huge investment for us. So in the future, they were able to protect it. So really, really important, I would say, also to take a good look into the possibility of this also being profitable for other zoos. It's not just for the sake of philanthropy and just saving the planet. Like, we have so many kids that come and they pay for, these separate attractions, and they are super excited. They're more excited to do the attractions and the interactive experiences than they are in looking at an animal that is not really, doing anything, because animals in captivity, they don't behave as they would naturally do. So most of the time, they're just standing there. So really important to be keen and be very proactive in terms of the interactive experiences as well, I would say.
I think everybody needs to do this, like every zoo in the world. This was awesome, Tom.
Please do. Please come.
I would love to. Well, thank you so much for this.
Thank you. Thank you, Beth.
To learn more about Tom, go to our website, speciesunite.com. We will have links to everything. We are on Facebook and Instagram at Species Unite. If you have a spare moment and could do us a favor, please subscribe, rate, review on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to podcasts. It really helps people find the show. I would like to thank everyone at Species Unite, including Gary Knutson, Caitlin Pierce, Amy Jones, Paul Healy, Santina Polky-Link, Bethany Jones, Hannah Gabrielson, Lorraine Doherty, and Anna Kolner, who wrote and performed today's music. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful day.